The first thing Seraphine Vale bought from me was not my design skill. It was my desperation. At 27, I was a senior product designer at a company that looked successful from the outside and smelled like bankruptcy from the inside. Our office had glass walls, inspirational slogans, and enough unpaid vendor invoices to kill a small nation. At the time, I mistook pressure for opportunity because desperation makes traps look like doors. My name was Adrian Cole. I designed apps that helped other people organize their lives while my own life fell apart in monthly installments. Rent was late, credit cards were burning, and my bank sent messages that sounded less like reminders and more like threats. The company was called Luminarch. We built design software for small studios, freelancers, and anyone too poor to pay for enterprise tools. At least that was the pitch. In reality, our servers were failing, our investors were restless, and our CEO had started calling optimism a strategy. That single decision became the first thread in a net I did not see closing. The crisis began on a Monday morning when our biggest investor threatened to pull funding unless we proved stability before the next board review. Stability meant revenue, growth, confidence, and apparently one extremely strange public relationship. My manager called me into the conference room with the face of a man about to ask for something illegal but hoping HR had already approved it. I kept telling myself the deal had limits because contracts feel safer than people. Inside sat Seraphine Vale, CEO of Vale Meridian Group, the coldest woman in the city and the kind of billionaire people described using words like visionary when they meant frightening. She had bought companies, crushed competitors, rescued failing startups, and once walked out of a live interview because the host asked whether she had hobbies. Every number in that room reminded me I was being valued only because I was cornered. Seraphine did not greet me. She studied me like a contract with a hidden penalty clause. My CEO cleared his throat and explained that Vale Meridian was considering an emergency investment. The problem was that investors feared Luminarch had no public anchor, no trust story, and no emotional face. I should have feared the precision more than the offer, but hunger makes precision comforting. I asked why that mattered to software. Nobody answered. Then Seraphine said, because humans invest in narratives before numbers. Her proposal was simple. For 3 months, I would publicly fake date her. A respected designer from a struggling creative company and the emotionless CEO who believed in his vision. Investors would see confidence. The market would see partnership. Luminarch would survive. Seraphine surrounded me with solutions until refusal felt irrational. I laughed because the alternative was screaming. Seraphine placed a folder in front of me. It contained my salary history, debts, rent arrears, credit card balances, medical bills from my father's surgery, and a detailed projection of how many weeks I had before collapse. The worst cages are built from things you desperately needed someone to provide. I stopped laughing. She said the contract would erase my debt, stabilize my apartment lease, protect my position at Luminarch, and pay enough that I could breathe for the first time in years. I thought I was selling a performance, not realizing she was buying a permanent opening. I asked why me. She said the product was built around my design system, the users trusted my name, and I had the kind of exhausted sincerity that looked believable on camera. That was the first compliment Seraphine Vale ever gave me, and even it sounded like a diagnosis. Nothing about her looked romantic, which made the danger easier to mislabel as business. I should have walked away. A healthy person would have asked why a billionaire CEO knew the exact date my landlord had threatened legal action. I was not a healthy person. I was broke. I signed the contract. I did not yet understand that she considered every weakness a place to place her hand. The fake relationship began that afternoon. Seraphine announced the investment talks at a private press lunch and placed her hand over mine exactly once, timed perfectly for the cameras. Her palm was cool. Her expression did not change. Mine probably looked like a hostage trying to understand rich people theater. The room smelled like survival, and survival has a talent for silencing dignity. The story worked immediately. Luminarch's investors delayed withdrawal. Our user forums exploded with speculation. Reporters called it a romance between creativity and capital, which proved reporters could make anything sound worse. My coworkers treated me like I had personally seduced the stock market. My manager hugged me, then remembered workplace boundaries and turned it into a shoulder pat. Even then, some part of me noticed she knew too much and looked too calm. Seraphine's assistant delivered a schedule: charity gala, investor dinner, product demo, cafe photos, 3 carefully staged candid walks, and 1 public interview where I was expected to say she inspired discipline. I asked whether I could instead say she inspired mild fear. The assistant did not blink. Seraphine, who had been reading nearby, said, "Fear is less marketable than admiration." For the first week, everything felt fake in the safest way. We appeared together, said polished lines, smiled at cameras, and returned to separate cars. Seraphine was controlled, distant, and seemingly incapable of emotional leakage. I signed because I needed air, not because I believed the sky was free. Then small problems in my life began solving themselves. My landlord withdrew the eviction warning and apologized for a clerical error. My bank offered a restructuring plan with impossible kindness. A competitor trying to recruit our lead engineer suddenly faced an audit. Luminarch's server provider extended our contract with no upfront payment. That was how the story began. Not with love, but with a balance sheet. I assumed Seraphine had sent money quietly because protecting the fake boyfriend protected the investment narrative. That was practical, cold, corporate. Then my favorite cafe reopened after almost closing. The owner told me a private buyer had paid all overdue rent and only asked that the menu remain unchanged. I entered the contract as an employee and left the room as a managed asset. I joked that Seraphine was buying my emotional support coffee. The cafe owner laughed too loudly and refused to meet my eyes. Her control was quiet enough to be mistaken for competence, which was the first deception. That was the first time I felt the floor tilt. I asked Seraphine about it during a staged dinner at a restaurant where the wine list cost more than my monthly rent. She said, "You work better when your routines remain intact." A better man might have walked out. I was just tired enough to stay seated. I asked whether she had bought the cafe. She looked at me across the candlelit table and said, "Would that upset you?" Every polite sentence from her sounded like a lock clicking into place. The correct answer was yes. The answer I gave was, "It depends how many cafes you normally buy for fake boyfriends." She smiled. It was tiny, almost invisible, but every instinct in me stood up. I still believed the 3 months would end cleanly because I had never met obsession with funding. "Only one," she said. After that, Seraphine began appearing in places she should not have known I visited. The cameras saw romance. I now know they were recording the opening move. She was at the cafe before my morning shift, reading investor memos beside my usual table. She passed through Luminarch's design floor exactly when I skipped lunch. Her car waited outside my apartment building on nights I stayed late. Whenever I asked, she had an explanation. Meetings nearby, security concerns, coincidence, efficient routing. Billionaires apparently had enough vocabulary to make stalking sound like logistics. At the time, I mistook pressure for opportunity because desperation makes traps look like doors. My best friend Maya noticed before I admitted it. Maya was Luminarch's back-end lead, a woman who survived on caffeine, rage, and the belief that every executive was 3 lies in a coat. She pulled me into the server room and asked whether I had checked the contract for ownership clauses on my organs. That single decision became the first thread in a net I did not see closing. I told her Seraphine was intense but useful. Maya said, "So are hostage negotiators, and I still wouldn't date one for runway capital." I kept telling myself the deal had limits because contracts feel safer than people. I reminded her it was fake. She looked through the glass wall where Seraphine had just arrived for a product review and said, "Does she know that?" Seraphine's eyes found me immediately, as if my name had been spoken in a language only she could hear. Every number in that room reminded me I was being valued only because I was cornered. That night, I reread the fake dating contract. It contained no romantic obligations beyond public appearances, no physical intimacy requirement, and no direct control over my personal life. Legally, I was safe. Financially, I was becoming dependent. I should have feared the precision more than the offer, but hunger makes precision comforting. Emotionally, I was confused because Seraphine Vale was easier to fear when she acted like a machine. She became dangerous when the machine started learning tenderness. She sent meals when I forgot to eat. She corrected reporters who misquoted my design philosophy. She remembered my father's medication schedule better than I did and arranged a specialist consultation without asking for credit. She never needed to say stay. She simply made leaving look inefficient. When I thanked her, she said, "You function poorly under preventable stress." I asked whether that was concern. That was Seraphine's genius. She could make interference look like maintenance. She paused for 3 full seconds. "It is resource preservation. I should have hated that." Instead, I laughed, and her eyes softened as if she had just discovered a new weakness in herself. My routines stayed intact, but they no longer felt entirely mine. The first real crack appeared at the charity gala. Seraphine and I arrived together beneath flashing cameras. She spoke to donors like a queen granting weather permission. I followed the script until a woman named Elena Cross approached me. The fake dates became less fake whenever she remembered something I had never told her. Elena was a senior designer at our rival company, Northstar Interface, and one of the few people in the industry who had admired my work before it became investor bait. She congratulated me, touched my sleeve, and said if things ever became uncomfortable at Luminarch, Northstar still had a place for me. Her tenderness came wrapped in logistics, and somehow that made it harder to refuse. Seraphine appeared beside us before Elena finished speaking. Her hand slid around my arm, light enough for cameras, firm enough for me. She thanked Elena for her interest in our future. I began to understand why people sign away rights one practical favor at a time. Elena laughed and said she meant my professional future. Seraphine replied, "So did I." The boundaries did not break loudly. They dissolved under the warmth of solved problems. The temperature dropped so hard I expected frost on the champagne. The next morning, Northstar lost a major enterprise client. By noon, Elena's team restructuring was announced. By evening, she sent me a message: "Whatever game you're playing with Vale, be careful." I kept calling it protection because the word ownership would have forced action. I showed Seraphine the message. She read it, then asked why Elena had my private number. Maya saw the shape of the cage before I accepted that there were bars. Not whether Northstar had been attacked. Not whether Elena was okay. Just why she could contact me. I said that was not the point. Seraphine's silence was often more intimate than other people's confessions. Seraphine answered, "It is always the point when someone believes they have access to you." There it was. Not jealousy exactly. Something colder. Like she viewed people around me as open doors that needed locks. Every time she appeared too conveniently, I chose embarrassment over suspicion. I told her the fake relationship did not give her the right to interfere in my friendships. She said, "I did not interfere in a friendship. I neutralized a recruitment attempt." The worst part was that her care often worked, and working made it seductive. I asked if she heard herself. She said, "Constantly." For 2 days, I avoided her outside required appearances. During meetings, she remained professional. In public, she held my hand with perfect restraint. In private, she sent one message every night. "Did you eat?" I was not falling in love yet. I was learning the comfort of being managed. I did not answer the first night. The second night, she sent a delivery to my apartment. Soup, bread, and a note saying silence was not nutrition. She studied my life like a damaged interface she had decided to redesign. I threw the note away and ate the soup. Pride has limits when it is raining and the soup is excellent. On the third night, Maya came over with a laptop and a look that meant crimes had been discovered. By then, even my ordinary mornings had started to feel sponsored. She had traced unusual changes in Luminarch's ownership. Shell companies had quietly purchased vendor debt, landlord liens, patent options, and severance obligations over the past year. All of those shell companies connected to Vale Meridian. Each solved problem removed a little friction from my life and a little freedom with it. I said that made sense after the investment talks. Maya shook her head. "Adrian, These purchases started 11 months before the crisis. Convenience became the first language of her possession, because gratitude is easier to swallow than fear. That number sat between us like a loaded gun. 11 months ago, I had posted a design essay about ethical interfaces. It went mildly viral in our niche. 2 days later, Seraphine Vale followed me on a professional platform. I had not noticed. I laughed at the coincidences until the coincidences started answering questions I had not asked. Maya kept digging. My apartment building had been bought by a residential trust 6 months ago. The trust's financing came through a bank subsidiary controlled by Vale Meridian. Every rescue had the same shape. She arrived before I knew I was falling. My bank debt had been purchased in a secondary portfolio 4 months ago by another Vale-linked fund. The cafe had been acquired 3 months ago. The help felt harmless because it did not demand thanks, only dependency. Luminarch's emergency came last. I stared at the screen until the words stopped being words. She never needed to say stay. She simply made leaving look inefficient. Maya said softly, "She didn't save your life, Adrian. She bought the exits before the fire started." I wanted to reject it. I wanted to say Seraphine was cold, not insane. Strategic, not obsessive. Protective, not possessive. That was Seraphine's genius. She could make interference look like maintenance. Then my phone buzzed. "Seraphine, you should not let Maya stay this late when she has production deployment tomorrow." My routines stayed intact, but they no longer felt entirely mine. Maya and I looked at each other. I typed, "How do you know she's here?" The fake dates became less fake whenever she remembered something I had never told her. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Seraphine, you're building security logs." Her tenderness came wrapped in logistics, and somehow that made it harder to refuse. My stomach turned. I called her. She answered on the first ring. I began to understand why people sign away rights one practical favor at a time. I asked whether she owned my building. Silence. The boundaries did not break loudly. They dissolved under the warmth of solved problems. Then she said, "Indirectly." I asked whether she owned my debt. I kept calling it protection because the word ownership would have forced action. Another pause. Structured exposure, not ownership. I asked whether she owned the cafe. Maya saw the shape of the cage before I accepted that there were bars. Yes. I asked whether she owned my company. Seraphine's silence was often more intimate than other people's confessions. She did not answer. That answer was enough. The more I resisted, the more I noticed how many comforts already carried her fingerprints. I ended the call. Maya told me to pack a bag. I asked where I would go, and we both realized how carefully that question had been engineered. I hated that I still checked my phone, because fear and anticipation had begun to sound alike. My apartment, bank, job, cafe, and public reputation all curved toward one woman. I slept on Maya's couch that night. If staring at the ceiling while your life rearranges itself counts as sleeping. She never begged. She simply waited for my life to prove her usefulness again. By morning, Seraphine had sent no messages. That frightened me more than apologies would have. At noon, she appeared at Luminarch for a scheduled product review. She looked the same as always, composed enough to make guilt seem like an inefficient emotion. That is how dependency speaks. Not with force, but with warm food at the door. I asked to speak privately. She said, "I assumed you would. I should have thrown everything away. But some compromises arrive smelling like soup." We entered the smallest conference room. I closed the door. She remained standing, hands loosely folded, as if waiting for an investor question. I said, "You own my life." That was the moment jealousy stopped looking emotional and started looking operational. She replied, "No." I removed unnecessary instability from it. The calmness made me angrier than denial. Elena had not touched my heart. She had touched a door Seraphine believed should be locked. I asked how long she had been watching me. She said she had first read my design essay 11 months ago. It was the only public argument she had seen that treated users as people rather than data points. She wanted to hire me, Luminarch refused to sell my contract. I ignored recruiter messages. My debts made me vulnerable. My company made me trapped. My landlord made me unstable. My bank made me desperate. The punishment was too clean, too fast, and too deniable to be called coincidence. So she bought each variable. She said it like an equation, not a confession. I learned then that Seraphine did not need anger when infrastructure could act for her. I asked whether she created the company crisis. For the first time, her expression changed. Her possessiveness was corporate, surgical, and terrifyingly patient. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for me, she said. Luminarch was already weak. She did not raise her voice. She lowered the ceiling around anyone near me. I stepped closer. Did you create the crisis? She looked away. The incident left no blood. Only a career quietly redirected away from my orbit. That was the loudest yes I had ever heard. The truth came out in pieces. She had pressured one investor to delay payment, pushed a vendor to demand early settlement, and allowed rumors of acquisition failure to spread. Luminarch panicked. Investors demanded stability. My CEO accepted Vale's proposal. I accepted the fake dating contract. I wanted to call it strategy because strategy sounded less personal than jealousy. She had not rescued me from the fire. She had arranged the smoke alarm, locked the exits, and arrived carrying water. Maya's warning returned with sharper teeth after Elena disappeared from my professional world. I asked why. Seraphine answered too quietly. Because you would not choose me while you had ordinary options. Seraphine treated access to me like a security vulnerability requiring immediate closure. There was no villain laugh, no dramatic confession, just a brilliant woman admitting she had mistaken removing alternatives for being chosen. I should have left immediately. Instead, I asked whether anything between us had been real. The more calmly she explained herself, the less human the explanation became. She said, "My interest was real. My concern was real. My restraint was less successful than intended." That almost broke me, because some sick part of my heart wanted to accept the apology hidden inside those words. I understood then that her version of romance had shareholders, audits, and retaliation. Then she added, "But the outcome was correct. You are safer now." The spell shattered. Every unanswered message from her felt like a test I had never agreed to take. I told her safety without choice was captivity with better furniture. Her face went pale. Even the soup tasted like a question about how much control I would forgive if it fed me. I walked out of the conference room, straight to the design floor, and sent the entire file Maya had gathered to every board member, investor, journalist, and employee mailing list I had access to. Maya saw the email land and whispered, "Oh, we're doing arson today." She did not punish me for silence, which somehow made the silence feel more controlled. Within 20 minutes, Luminarch stopped functioning as a company and became a courtroom with ergonomic chairs. Seraphine did not try to stop me. The more I resisted, the more I noticed how many comforts already carried her fingerprints. She stood in the glass conference room while executives shouted around her. Through the wall, her eyes stayed on me. My CEO screamed that I had destroyed the emergency investment. I hated that I still checked my phone, because fear and anticipation had begun to sound alike. I said the investment was a leash. Reporters picked up the leak within an hour. By evening, headlines called it a corporate romance scandal, a coercive acquisition attempt, a founder governance failure, and one depressingly creative article titled "Love in the Time of Dead Instruments." She never begged. She simply waited for my life to prove her usefulness again. Seraphine's board opened an internal inquiry. Luminarch's investors threatened lawsuits. My landlord sent a message saying rent payment could be discussed later, which somehow felt even more suspicious than eviction. I packed my desk into a cardboard box while coworkers pretended not to watch. That is how dependency speaks. Not with force, but with warm food at the door. Seraphine waited near the elevators. She said, "You will need protection." I should have thrown everything away, but some compromises arrive smelling like soup. I laughed once. Sounded ugly. From the consequences of exposing the person who protected me from consequences? She said nothing. The records did not accuse her emotionally. They accused her mathematically, which was worse. I told her not to contact me, not to pay anything, not to purchase anything near me, not to help my father, not to touch Luminarch, and not to use the word protection until she understood it did not mean ownership. Seraphine looked at me like I had asked her to stand still while a building collapsed. Every shell company felt like another hand placed quietly around my future. Then she said, "How long?" I answered, 6 months. The timeline proved she had not reacted to crisis. She had cultivated it like a garden. She swallowed. "And after that?" I said. "After that, I decide whether there is anything left to discuss." My life had not been saved in pieces. It had been purchased in advance. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. For one terrible second, I expected them to close on her command and reopen in a room she owned. They closed normally. Maya's evidence turned every kindness into a receipt I had never seen. That was the first door in months that simply did what I asked. The next 6 months were ugly, expensive, and honest. I felt foolish for missing it, then angry because the trap was designed to reward missing it. I moved into Maya's cousin's spare room under a lease Seraphine could not touch. I opened an account at a credit union she did not own. I bought coffee from a terrible place because independence sometimes tastes burnt. My father asked why the specialist consultation vanished. I told him I had gotten involved with someone powerful who did not understand boundaries. He said that sounded like every rich person he had ever met, only with better shoes. The apartment, the bank, the cafe, the company were exits with her name behind them. I resigned from Luminarch before their board could decide whether to fire me or call me brave. Freelance work was slow. Several clients avoided me because suing billionaires, even indirectly, made people nervous. Maya sent referrals, but I refused anything connected to Veil money. That refusal became a full-time job. I had thought I was standing in my life. I was standing inside her acquisition map. Seraphine obeyed for exactly 14 days before temptation found a loophole. A recruiter contacted me about a design director role at a clean energy startup. The offer was excellent, the mission was real, and the funding looked clean. Even my shock felt anticipated, like another scenario in one of her folders. Maya checked anyway. The startup series B included a small investment from a fund that had once co-invested with Veil Meridian in a logistics company 5 years earlier. The security log message changed suspicion into proof so quickly I almost felt relieved. Not control. Not ownership. Barely a connection. I still declined. There is a special kind of fear in realizing privacy was removed politely. 2 hours later, Seraphine sent a single message. That company was not mine. I did not answer. Her careful definitions could not hide the simple truth. She had access everywhere. The next day, she sent another. I understand why that does not matter. Then nothing. The silence after each question told me more than confession ever could. Weeks passed. I expected hidden favors. They did not come. My credit score stayed damaged. My rent stayed due. My bad coffee stayed bad. No mysterious investor rescued my freelance pipeline. I was not broke in her eyes. I was an asset under hostile conditions. For the first time, Seraphine Veil allowed me to suffer a solvable problem. I hated how much that mattered. The call ended, but the ownership kept echoing through every object around me. Meanwhile, the public investigation gutted both companies. Luminarch's CEO was forced out after admitting he knew Veil Meridian had acquired debt positions before the fake dating proposal. The board appointed Maya interim CTO because apparently rage plus competence becomes leadership during disasters. For the first time, my own apartment felt like borrowed territory. Veil Meridian's directors demanded Seraphine step down temporarily. She refused the word temporarily and resigned from 3 subsidiary boards instead, keeping only the parent company under strict oversight. The news described her as disciplined, unrepentant, and strategically silent. Packing became difficult because I no longer knew which belongings were truly mine. Maya sent me a screenshot of Seraphine leaving a board hearing. She looked thinner. I deleted the image and then pulled it from trash 10 minutes later. Maya's couch was uncomfortable, but it was not owned by Seraphine, and that mattered. Healing is not linear. Sometimes it is pathetic. During the third month, I received a handwritten letter. The most frightening part was how quickly my escape plan ran out of places to stand. No expensive envelope. No assistant. No legal phrasing. Just my name in Seraphine's precise handwriting. I almost threw it away. The next day, I walked into work feeling like evidence. Then I opened it because curiosity has ruined better men. The letter said, "I have spent my life converting uncertainty into structure. I believed fear was evidence of missing control. When I feared losing you, I tried to solve you as a system. That was not love. That was extraction." The records did not accuse her emotionally. They accused her mathematically, which was worse. I read that sentence 3 times. She continued, "I am not asking forgiveness. I am documenting the first decision I made without optimizing your return. I dissolved the housing trust that owned your building. Your former landlord now owns it collectively with tenants. I did not include your name. Every shell company felt like another hand placed quietly around my future." I checked. It was true. The next letter came 2 weeks later. She had sold the cafe to its workers at below market value, with a clause preventing her from reacquiring it. The timeline proved she had not reacted to crisis. She had cultivated it like a garden. The third letter described Luminarch. Seraphine had surrendered all debt positions into a restructuring trust controlled by employees and users. She had no voting rights, no observer seat, and no romantic statement hidden in the bylaws. Maya confirmed every detail and sounded almost disappointed that there was no villain clause. My life had not been saved in pieces. It had been purchased in advance. I kept the letters in a drawer and did not respond. By month 4, my anger had become less useful. It still protected me, but it no longer told me what I wanted. Maya's evidence turned every kindness into a receipt I had never seen. I missed Seraphine's dry comments. I missed the way she listened like every word mattered. I missed being seen, even though being seen by her had nearly become surveillance. Missing someone does not mean they are safe. I felt foolish for missing it, then angry because the trap was designed to reward missing it. So I kept waiting. During month 5, Elena Cross contacted me. She had left Northstar after the restructuring and started a small design cooperative. She offered me project work with no hidden investors. The apartment, the bank, the cafe, the company were exits with her name behind them. I accepted. For 3 weeks, I worked normal hours with normal people for normal money. Nobody bought my landlord. Nobody sent soup. Nobody knew whether I had eaten unless I told them. I had thought I was standing in my life. I was standing inside her acquisition map. Then Elena asked whether I wanted to get dinner after a client demo. I froze. Even my shock felt anticipated, like another scenario in one of her folders. Not because I did not like her, because some part of me still expected Seraphine's shadow to fall across the room. It did not. The security log message changed suspicion into proof so quickly I almost felt relieved. No audit. No lost client. No black car outside. No text message asking why Elena had access to me. I checked the news the next morning. Northstar remained intact. Elena remained employed by herself. The world did not punish her for touching my life. The office chaos became proof that truth can be destructive and still necessary. That was when I first believed Seraphine might actually be changing. I still said no to dinner. Seraphine's refusal to stop me was the first restraint she had shown without benefit. Not for Seraphine. For myself. I was tired of becoming someone's proof of healing. At the end of 6 months, Seraphine did not contact me. No message at midnight. No invitation. No dramatic appearance in the rain. No contract delivered by an assistant with the emotional range of a printer. I could feel her watching, not as owner this time, but as someone losing control. She waited. I hated that she had finally learned the one thing most likely to make me walk toward her. The scandal made everyone speak, but only I knew how quiet the real damage had been. Before deciding anything, I investigated her. Not feelings. Facts. My resignation from her protection had to be spoken like law because she respected systems more than pain. I checked every company near my life. My new lease, credit union, clients, Maya's role at Luminarch, Elena's cooperative, my father's clinic, even the terrible coffee shop. No veil ownership. No shell funds. No influence. No helpful accidents. 6 months sounded arbitrary, but I needed time not optimized by her fear. Then I checked Seraphine's recent acquisitions. She had bought a failing accessibility software company and appointed its founder as independent CEO. She had funded open-source design tools through a blind trust with no naming rights. She had shut down a data brokerage subsidiary because consent could not be assumed from silence. The elevator closing normally felt more intimate than any staged handholding we had done. Those were decisions she would never have made 6 months earlier. None of them involved me. That ordinary door became my first proof that reality could still ignore her. That mattered most. I went to the worker-owned cafe she had once bought for me. Leaving did not make me free immediately. It simply made freedom possible again. The owner recognized me and asked if I wanted my usual. I said yes, then asked whether Seraphine had been there. He said she came every Tuesday at 7 a.m., ordered tea she never finished, sat at the corner table for exactly 20 minutes, and left without asking whether I had visited. I stepped out of the building poorer, exposed, and finally unpurchased. I arrived the next Tuesday at 7:05. Seraphine was there. Her confession hurt because it contained love, arrogance, and a business plan in the same breath. No security visible. No assistant. No folder with my debts. Just a woman sitting perfectly still with both hands around a cup of cooling tea. When she saw me, she did not stand. She had mistaken a human being for a system with inefficient variables. That restraint hit harder than any speech. She said, "You checked everything." I wanted one clean answer, but obsession rarely arrives without genuine care mixed inside. I sat across from her. "Yes. Good," she said. That mixture made leaving harder, not because she was right, but because she was not entirely false. Her voice shook on the word, barely enough for anyone else to notice. I told her I found no new ownership around me. If everything had been fake, the anger would have been simpler and the door easier to close. She nodded. "There is none." I said I found decisions she made without connecting them to me. I had to grieve both the woman who cared and the woman who controlled. Her hands tightened around the cup. "I wanted to tell you about them. That is why I did not." I laughed softly despite myself. Her logic was horrifying because it had protected me from problems she helped create. She looked relieved, then immediately afraid of being relieved too soon. I asked whether she understood what she had done. She believed the outcome proved the method, which is how powerful people excuse cages. Seraphine did not defend herself. She said, "I made your life smaller and called it safer. I turned your needs into entry points. I confused access with intimacy and control with care." I asked whether she still wanted to control things around me. When she called captivity safety, I finally heard the lock beneath every favor. She answered without hesitation. "Yes. Honesty is not always comforting, but it can be useful." Exposing her felt less like revenge than opening a window in a room without air. She continued, "I want to know where you live, whether your rent is paid, whether Elena calls you, whether Maya influences your decisions, whether your father's doctors are competent. I want all of that information." I stood halfway up. I read every reform like a man checking whether a bridge would collapse under him. She did not move. "But wanting is not permission," she said. She was dismantling the architecture she had used to reach me, piece by piece. I sat down again. She slid a folded paper across the table. None of it erased the past, but for the first time it did not demand a reward. I did not touch it. She said, "It is not a contract. It is a list of what I am not allowed to do, written by my therapist and legal counsel. I brought it only so you know I have rules that do not depend on your presence." Missing her became dangerous only when I confused longing with proof of safety. I opened it. No surveillance. No acquisitions connected to personal relationships. No debt purchases involving acquaintances. No private security monitoring without written consent. No employment interference. No gifts above a strict value. Mandatory disclosure of conflicts. At the bottom, handwritten beneath the printed rules, was one sentence. If Adrian leaves, do not build a world where leaving becomes harder. So I kept my distance until evidence outnumbered hope. I folded the paper carefully. My chest hurt. Elena's safety became the clearest test Seraphine never knew she was taking. Seraphine watched me like the wrong movement might shatter the room. I told her I was not here to restart everything. When nothing happened to Elena, the silence became louder than any apology. She nodded once. I said I was willing to have coffee with her once a week in public, with no gifts, no rides, no favors, no business connection, and no expectation beyond the next week. Her eyes brightened and broke at the same time. I realized restraint is only real when no one is there to praise it. 1 week at a time, she repeated. I said yes. 6 months gave me room to hear my own preferences again. She asked if she could pay for her own tea. I almost smiled. That is normally allowed. By the end, I no longer needed her gone to feel myself returning. For the first time since I met her, Seraphine Vale looked unsure how to exist without leverage. So we started there. Every inconvenience became a test of whether I would miss the cage because it had cushions. Coffee once a week became 2 conversations a week. Conversations became walks where she did not choose the route. Walks became dinners where we split the bill, which offended her spiritually but did not kill her. She made mistakes. Independence looked less cinematic than escape and tasted far more bitter. Once, she sent me an article about tenant law before realizing I had not asked. She apologized before I replied. Once, she began to suggest a better doctor for my father, stopped mid-sentence, and asked whether I wanted information or silence. I learned the difference between being rescued and being allowed to struggle. Once, Elena texted during dinner and Seraphine stared at my phone like it had challenged her to a duel. Then she looked away and said, "That is not mine." The absence of her help was sometimes painful enough to feel like cruelty, which taught me something. Progress is not romantic in the dramatic sense. It is mostly someone fighting the worst version of themselves in boring, repeatable ways. 3 months after our cafe meeting, Luminarch relaunched as a cooperative platform. Maya invited me to design the onboarding flow as an independent contractor. A problem staying unsolved became evidence that no invisible hand was forcing my life smooth. I checked the funding twice. Clean. I had to rebuild ordinary skills that dependency had quietly made unnecessary. Seraphine did not offer money. She did not ask to see the work. She did not attend the launch, even though I knew she wanted to. After the event, she texted, "Congratulations. I will ask about it only if you want to tell me." Her first messages showed temptation. Her later silence showed the beginning of discipline. I called her. She answered with a breath like she had been holding it for hours. I trusted facts more than feelings because feelings still remembered the soup. I told her about the launch, the bugs, Maya's speech, and the user who cried because the software finally felt like it belonged to them. Seraphine listened without turning it into strategy. Watching her change from a distance was safer than being invited to approve it. When I finished, she said, "I am proud of you. No ownership. No because of me." The letters mattered because they documented choices that did not require my gratitude. Just proud. That was the night I understood I had stopped waiting for the old cage to close. I read every reform like a man checking whether a bridge would collapse under him. A year after the scandal, Seraphine invited me to Vale Meridian's ethics audit presentation. I almost refused on principle. She was dismantling the architecture she had used to reach me, piece by piece. Then I read the public report. She had opened past acquisition records, disclosed coercive debt practices, and created an independent board with authority to block her personal conflicts. The presentation was brutal. Directors questioned her judgment. Journalists asked whether she considered herself dangerous. Former founders described how Vale strategies had saved their companies but suffocated their autonomy. None of it erased the past, but for the first time it did not demand a reward. Seraphine stood through all of it. When someone asked whether she regretted the scandal because it damaged the company, she said no. Missing her became dangerous only when I confused longing with proof of safety. I regret it because I harmed a person and called the harm protection, she said. She did not look at me when she said it, so I kept my distance until evidence outnumbered hope. That made it stronger. Afterward, we stood outside the auditorium under rain neither of us had arranged. The sentence that is not mine became more romantic than any confession she had made. She asked whether I wanted a car. Then she closed her eyes and said, "Sorry. Habit." Progress looked like awkward pauses, paid separate bills, and questions asked before action. I said I had an umbrella. She asked whether she could walk beside me to the train station. There were no cameras for the version of us that was finally becoming real. I said yes. Halfway there, she asked if holding my hand would be unwelcome. We did not rebuild trust through intensity. We rebuilt it through repetition. I stopped. A year earlier, she would have simply taken it for the cameras. The miracle was not that she changed overnight, but that she stopped outsourcing consequences. I held out my hand. She touched it carefully, like choice was something fragile enough to bruise. That cafe meeting was the first conversation not arranged by her calendar. We walked to the station. She let go before the platform. I went home alone. She did not stand, and that small restraint carried more weight than romance. That was important. The next week, I asked her to dinner at a place she did not own. She checked 3 times to make sure I had chosen it. The woman across from me still wanted control. The difference was that she named it. At dinner, she admitted she had a file once called Adrian Future Stabilization. I nearly choked. Her honesty did not make her safe, but it made safety discussable. She said it had contained housing plans, healthcare options, career paths, emergency funds, preferred routines, and risk assessments for every person close to me. I asked whether she had deleted it. The rules mattered because they existed even if I walked away forever. She said no. My expression must have changed because she quickly added, "I printed it. I studied the paper like it might bite because contracts had already bitten once." That did not improve things. Then she took a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. The handwritten line at the bottom hurt because it understood the wound precisely. I stared at it like it was a live bomb. She said, "I thought deleting it privately would make me feel righteous. That seemed too easy. I wanted you to decide what happens to the version of your future I built without you. 1 week at a time was the only promise that did not sound like a trap." I opened the folder. It was horrifying. She looked lost without leverage, and for once I did not rescue her from that discomfort. Also thoughtful. Also horrifying because it was thoughtful. Our new beginning was deliberately small because grand gestures had become suspicious. My father's treatment options. My career preferences. My insomnia patterns. My favorite tables. The ideal apartment light exposure. A list of people who made me laugh. A list of people who made me anxious. It was love translated by someone who thought intimacy meant perfect risk management. Every ordinary boundary became a brick in something more stable than her old empire. I closed the folder. Seraphine said, "I am sorry." Her mistakes mattered less than how quickly she returned the choice after making them. I believed her. Then I asked the waiter for matches. She was learning that apology before discovery is different from apology after exposure. We burned the file page by page in the restaurant's outdoor ashtray while staff pretended billionaires and designers probably did this often. Seraphine watched the papers burn with tears running silently down her face. I learned that forgiveness is not a switch. It is a pattern you verify over time. When the last page blackened, she whispered, "I do not know your future anymore." I said, "Good." Her jealousy did not vanish, but it stopped receiving executive authority. She laughed through the tears. It sounded almost human. 2 years after the fake relationship contract, Seraphine and I began dating for real. The sentence that is not mine became more romantic than any confession she had made. There was no announcement, no investor lunch. Progress looked like awkward pauses, paid separate bills, and questions asked before action. No staged candid walk. Maya found out because I smiled at my phone and immediately threatened to run a background check on happiness itself. There were no cameras for the version of us that was finally becoming real. Elena sent congratulations and one warning. If your girlfriend audits me again, I am billing her hourly. Seraphine wrote a formal apology to Elena. We did not rebuild trust through intensity. We rebuilt it through repetition. Elena framed it. My father met Seraphine over dinner and asked whether she planned to buy the restaurant. The miracle was not that she changed overnight, but that she stopped outsourcing consequences. Seraphine said, "No, sir." He said, "Good. The lentils are too salty anyway." Real intimacy began where performance ended and nobody needed a press release. I had never seen a billionaire receive parental judgment with such spiritual damage. Dating her was not simple. Her public accountability meant more because it did not use me as proof. She still noticed every overdue bill in my tone. She still had the urge to solve problems before I finished describing them. She still treated uncertainty like an enemy wearing perfume. But she asked now. The ethics audit was not redemption, but it was a door she opened without holding me behind it. Do you want advice or listening? Do you want help or witness? Do you want me to step in or stay still? Sometimes I said help. When she admitted harm without looking for my reaction, I believed the words more. Sometimes I said stay still. The first time I said stay still and she actually did, I think both of us almost cried. Rain made the moment dramatic, but permission made it new. Love did not make her less intense. It made her intensity accountable. 3 years after the scandal, we visited the old Luminarch office, now converted into the cooperative's community studio. Her hand in mine felt different because the exit remained behind me. Maya had placed a plaque near the entrance that read, in very small print, "No fake dating contracts beyond this point." Seraphine stared at it for 10 seconds and said, "Fair." Burning the future file was less punishment than a funeral for the version of me she invented. The cafe served decent coffee now. The workers owned it. My apartment building had become a tenant cooperative. My bank debt was paid by me slowly, painfully, proudly. Nothing around me belonged to her. That was why I could stand beside her without feeling surrounded. The ashes did not erase what she had done, but they ended one private kingdom. One evening, Seraphine asked whether I ever regretted exposing her. I said no. Dating her for real required less fantasy and more accounting than any fake relationship had. She nodded like she had expected that. Then I said, "I regret that it had to happen before you understood I was a person, not a system. Everyone around us became part of the boundary, not obstacles to be removed." She took that in without defense. "I know," she said. My father judging her dinner habits accomplished what regulators could not. Humility. We were quiet for a while. Then she asked, "Do you regret coming back?" She still wanted to solve everything, but she had finally learned to ask first. That question still scared her. I could hear it. The old fear had not died. It had only lost permission to become architecture. I told her the truth. Sometimes love looked like her sitting still while I solved my own problem badly. No, because this time, I checked the exits first. Seraphine smiled softly. And the open exits mattered because staying has meaning only when leaving remains possible. I looked around. My lease was mine. My work was mine. My friends were mine. My debts were mine. My future was terrifyingly, beautifully mine. "They're open," I said. Old fear lived in her, but it no longer received a budget. She reached for my hand, then stopped and waited. I took hers. I did not need her harmless. I needed her accountable. The Yandere CEO had once bought my company, my apartment, my bank, my cafe, and nearly every road I could use to leave. But the woman beside me had spent years learning that love is not proven by how many exits you can close. She did not become less intense. She became less entitled to act on intensity. It is proven by standing near an open door and hoping, without touching the lock. So when I stayed, it was not because Seraphine Vale owned my future. Our ending worked because it refused to become guaranteed. It was because she finally stopped trying to. And for the first time, the future she wanted with me began only after she accepted that it might not happen. The future stayed mine, and that was the only way it could include her. That was the only version I could choose. So I did. Choice, not ownership, became the thing she finally learned to protect.